Pupil sluggish, no doll's eyes, heart rate 92, sat 95 on 2 liters.
Got it. BP's holding at 110/70. Labs are on the way.
Drips wide open, fluids are going, no radial pulse drop. Let's give her a sternal rub, see if we can wake her up.
Copy. Everyone stay ready.
They were already talking about pulling the plug before the doctor even finished the sentence. There he was, lying motionless in a hospital bed that smelled like bleach in quiet panic. At the same time, the people who'd once called him their pride stood in a neat little half circle like an awkward family photo nobody wanted to take. His mother kept twisting a tissue until it looked like a rope. His older brother stared at the floor as if the tiles had offended him personally. His wife on paper kept checking her phone every 30 seconds, like the WI. If I might deliver a miracle? The nurse said something about swelling. The doctor mentioned an unpredictable recovery. His family heard one thing: inconvenience, and to be fair, they'd always been allergic to inconvenience. They weren't crying the way people cry when they're scared of losing someone. It was more like the look you get when your flight's delayed and you've already mentally checked out of the trip. His mom asked whether insurance covered long-term care. His brother asked if the apartment lease could be broken without penalty. His wife asked if the hospital had a charging station nearby. Nobody asked if he could hear them. Nobody said his name like it mattered. The irony would have been funny if it wasn't a punch to the gut. This man had spent his whole life holding everybody up, and the second he couldn't stand, they stepped back as if he were contagious. A week later, they stopped coming. 2 weeks later, his wife posted a vague social media update about choosing peace and moving forward, which is the modern way of saying, I'm done babysitting someone else's tragedy. His brother called once just to ask about the car title. His mother left a voicemail about selling his old childhood house because she needed to simplify. Simplify what, exactly? The guilt. And then, on a chilly Thursday morning, something changed. A lawyer walked in holding a thick folder, followed by 2 people in suits who didn't look like hospital visitors. They didn't look like people who did small talk in hallways. They looked like people who owned hallways. The nurse asked who they were there to see. They said his name. His family didn't know this yet. But those 3 strangers weren't there because he was dying. They were there because they'd finally found him, because the coma patient in room 614 wasn't just anyone. He was the founder of an $850 million company that the world believed belonged to someone else, and his family had no idea what they'd just walked away from. So, yeah. This is where the story starts. Not in the coma, not in the betrayal, but at the moment, the world was about to flip on its head. Welcome, story lovers. From where are you watching? Drop your city name in the comments so we can see how far our story travels. Before he was a patient in room 614. Before the headlines that would later scream his name. He was just a kid named Evan Carter from a town so small you could blink and miss it off the highway. His childhood wasn't the kind of struggle people post about for sympathy. It was the quiet, everyday kind, the kind that doesn't look dramatic from the outside but stays in your bones forever. His dad was a mechanic when he felt like it, and a ghost when he didn't. Mom worked doubles at a diner where customers snapped their fingers like she was Siri. Money was never stable in their house. It was like a visitor who sometimes stopped by, ate everything, and left without saying goodbye. Evan learned early that if you wanted something, you had 2 choices: work for it or watch someone else have it. At 12, he was already sweeping floors at the local grocery store. Not because he had some noble work ethic, but because the fridge was emptier than his family wanted to admit. At 14, he was fixing neighbors' computers, old clunky desktops that took 10 minutes just to boot, because he was the only kid who understood what a driver update was. He didn't even charge much. Mostly, he just liked the feeling of being useful. School was his one clean escape. In class, nobody cared that his backpack was older than he was. Nobody cared that his shoes had been glued at the soles twice. The teachers cared that he was smart. The kind of smart that makes adults tilt their head and say, "Wait, how did you figure that out?" He built a tiny app in 9th grade that helped the diner track orders faster. He did it on a beat-up laptop his mom brought home from the lost and found bin at work. The computer was missing a key and had a cracked hinge, but to Evan, it was a spaceship. He started dreaming about leaving town. Not in the dramatic one day I'll show them all kind of way. More in a quiet, tired way. Like someone who just wants air that doesn't smell like gasoline and broken promises. But the universe has a habit of testing people right when they start believing in themselves. In his senior year, his mom got sick. Not a cold sick. Not a give it 2 weeks sick. She got that slow, heavy kind of sick where the hospital bills arrive. Before the test results due, Evan was accepted into a state university on scholarship. The letter came in the mail like a golden ticket. His mom cried when she saw it. Not because she was sad, but because, for once, life was giving her kid something that wasn't a burden. Then the diagnosis landed. She needed treatment far away. He needed money yesterday. Evan did what kids like him always do. He folded up his dream like a note and put it in his back pocket for later. He deferred college. Took 2 jobs. Morning shift at the grocery store. Night shift at a warehouse where the air was cold and the work was brutal. Every paycheck went to medical bills, gas money, and groceries that weren't instant noodles. People called him responsible. But responsibility at 18 isn't cute. It's grief in disguise. He didn't complain. Not out loud. Anyway, he did that thing strong people do. Kept moving even when their insides were begging for a nap. They'd never get his mom recovered enough to walk again. Enough to smile without pain. When she finally said he should go back to school, he nodded like he hadn't already missed the deadline 3 times. He did end up leaving town 2 years later than planned, carrying more fatigue than most people collect in a lifetime. College was less like a dream and more like survival with better Wi-Fi. His scholarship covered tuition, but not rent. So he lived with 3 roommates in a place that smelled like old carpet and microwave ramen. He worked in the campus IT lab at night, while other students went to football games. Evan went to the computer lab. While they posted party photos, he posted bug fixes. He wasn't jealous. He was busy building a future he wasn't sure anyone would live long enough to see. That's where he met Claire. She was bright, organized, the kind of person who had color-coded planners and a way of making chaos feel like a solvable problem. Evan was drawn to her calm, and she was drawn to his quiet intensity. They got married young. Not in a fairy tale way, more in a we're both tired of being alone in this fight kind of way. The wedding was small. His mom cried again. His brother congratulated him with the enthusiasm of a guy returning a blender. Claire promised they'd build something together at first. They really tried. Evan took a junior developer job at a mid-tier tech company. The pay didn't make him rich, but it made life feel possible. He'd come home late, exhausted, and still pull out his laptop to keep working on his own ideas. He had this itch, this sense that he could build something better than what he was seeing in the corporate world. He was right. But being right doesn't stop bills. Claire got pregnant at 24. They were happy, terrified, and broke. Evan started freelancing on the side. Claire said she supported him, but she also started saying little things like, maybe you should focus on stability. Maybe now isn't the time for experiments. Evan agreed out loud. Inside, he kept building anyway. He took his savings, what little he had, and spent it on servers, software, and a tiny rented office he shared with 2 other dreamers from his old IT lab. He called the idea Nixora Systems. The concept was simple but powerful. A cloud platform that made supply chains smarter, faster, and basically less of a dumpster fire for mid-sized companies. He wasn't chasing Silicon Valley hype. He was chasing efficiency, real-world usefulness. He wanted to help businesses stop bleeding money by modernizing their systems. The first year was brutal. Investors ignored him. Clients hesitated. His co-founder quit. Evan's desk was a folding table. His chair was a donation from someone's basement. He lived on coffee and whatever Claire left in the fridge when she was too tired to cook. He missed birthdays. He missed sleep. He missed being fun. And slowly, without saying it outright, Claire began to miss being married to him. When their son was born early and spent weeks in the NICU, Evan almost broke. He kept showing up at the hospital, laptop in one hand, tiny baby socks in the other, juggling worlds that were both falling apart. The baby survived. Nixira barely did. The baby survived. Nixora barely did. Evan's brother, Mark, started dropping by around that time. Mark had always been the loud one, the social one, the guy who could sell sunscreen in Alaska. He'd bounced around jobs, always chasing big opportunities, but never landing anywhere long. Now, suddenly, Mark was interested in Evan's little startup. He said he wanted to help. Said he believed in Evan for the first time in their adult lives. Said he had connections. Evan wanted to believe him because, deep down, even the strongest people wish their family would finally clap for them. So he brought Mark, and that decision would haunt him like a slow-rolling thundercloud. Mark handled the investor pitch decks. Mark schmoozed. Mark represented the company. Evan was too busy coding, dealing with clients, and keeping the lights on to notice what was happening under his nose. Nixira started landing contracts. Small ones at first, then bigger ones. Then a major distribution company signed on, and everything accelerated. The growth wasn't loud. It was steady like a river that doesn't brag but still carves mountains by year 3. Nixira wasn't just surviving. It was thriving. It was winning. But Evan's life outside the company was unraveling. Claire didn't like the hours. The risk, the way investors called Mark instead of Evan. She didn't say she was jealous. But the air between them began to feel like cold steam, always present. Never comforting. Evan kept thinking there would be a moment when he could finally breathe and bring his family into the light with him. He didn't realize he was already walking into the dark. The first real sign that Nixora had crossed into a different universe came in the form of an email Evan almost deleted. A logistics firm in Chicago wanted full nationwide integration. A deal big enough to make their old revenue look like pocket change. Evan stared at the screen for a long time, half excited, half dizzy. He called Mark because Mark was the business guy. Mark showed up in a tailored suit, smiling like he'd already cashed the check. He said this was the moment they'd been waiting for, the kind of contract that turns a startup into a serious contender. Evan believed him. He wanted to believe him. What he didn't notice was how Mark started positioning himself at the center of everything. The Chicago firm wanted to meet the leadership. Mark insisted he go alone because Evan was too technical and clients liked charisma. Mark said he'd handle the relationship while Evan kept the product strong. That logic made sense in a way that red flags often do. Meanwhile, Claire pushed harder for Evan to think about family. Their son was 2. She wanted weekends. She wanted normal. Evan wanted those things too, but he was trapped inside the classic working class curse. If you stop now, you lose everything you sacrificed for. He promised her it was temporary. He promised her that the next contract would stabilize them. He promised her, a little too desperately, that he was doing it for them. But promises sound different to tired people. Then the accident happened. Not the Coma one. The other accident? The quieter one. Evan was reviewing the Chicago contract details when he noticed something. Off in the signature section, the legal name, listed as founder and CEO, was not Evan Carter. It was Mark Carter. At first, Evan thought it was a clerical mistake. He called Mark, expecting an easy laugh and an oops, my bad. Mark didn't laugh. Mark got defensive. Said it was just for optics. Said investors liked a business face. Evan said he should stop being sensitive about titles because we're brothers. It's the same thing. That's the kind of sentence that always comes right before someone takes your wallet. Evan felt a knot in his stomach. Not angry yet. Confusion mixed with betrayal's early shadow. He asked for the paperwork from earlier. Rounds. Mark stalled. Dodged, said he'd send it. Days passed. Evan dug. He found investor filings, cap tables, And in corporation docs he hadn't looked at in years because he was too busy building. Mark had quietly listed himself as acting CEO for fundraising purposes. Mark had issued shares to himself. Mark had altered board records. Evan wasn't just sidelined, he was being erased. When Evan confronted him, Mark acted hurt. Evan was ungrateful. Said without Mark's connections, Nixira would have died. It was the oldest trick in the Betrayal handbook. Make the victim feel guilty for noticing the crime. Evan didn't want to blow up the company. Nixira was his life's work. He also didn't want to blow up his family. He kept thinking there was a clean fix, a way to reclaim his role quietly. But Mark had already built a world where Evan was the basement engine, and Mark was the shiny hood ornament. The board listened to Mark. The investors liked Mark. The Chicago clients loved Mark. Evan began to realize the company was growing faster than he could control, and it got worse when the Chicago deal went public. The press release quoted Mark as the founder. Tech blogs ran stories about Mark's vision. Evan was mentioned once as lead architect, like he was a helpful contractor instead of the guy who built the foundation. Claire saw the articles. She saw the photos of Mark shaking hands, smiling in interviews, wearing success like it fit him. She asked Evan why his own brother was getting credit. Evan tried to explain. He tried to downplay. He wanted to make it sound like something temporary he could handle. But Claire's patience had been dying quietly for a long time. She said she didn't sign up for chaos. She said she wanted security. She said she was tired of watching Evan lose while other people wore his work like a trophy. She didn't leave right away. She started leaving emotionally, first shorter conversations, a colder tone, and less eye contact when he talked. He kept pouring himself into Nixira anyway, because that's what people do when everything else feels shaky. They cling harder. Nixira's revenue exploded. Mid-sized companies across the country adopted their platform. Their predictive supply algorithm reduced clients' costs by millions. Word spread, investors lined up, and every time an investor wanted to meet the CEO, Mark showed up. Evan started working longer hours than ever. His health took a hit. He ignored it because he'd been trained his whole life to ignore his own body if someone else needed something. Then came the night that changed everything. He'd stayed late in the office, trying to patch a security vulnerability before a major rollout. It was raining, the kind of rain that feels like the sky is mad at you personally. He finally finished around 2 a.m., got in his car, and drove home. He never made it. A truck ran a red light at an intersection that the city had promised to fix for years. Evan's car spun, crumpled, and went quiet in the middle of the wet street. He woke up for a second, just long enough to taste metal and hear distant sirens, and then he fell into darkness. A coma. 2 words that erased time at the hospital. Mark showed up first. He cried out loud. He hugged nurses. He told doctors he was Evan's business partner and next of kin. Claire arrived later, shaking, exhausted, scared, but fear doesn't last forever when resentment has been waiting in the corner. Mark told her Nixira was on the brink. He said Evan's legal structure was messy. He said they needed to keep things moving in case Evan didn't wake up. Claire, drowning in shock and tired of instability, listened. She signed papers she didn't thoroughly read. Mark took control officially, and then, as weeks passed and Evan didn't wake, Mark started acting like the tragedy had a built-in expiration date. He reduced hospital visits. He urged Claire to start thinking practically. He told their mom that Evan wouldn't want to be a vegetable. He planted tiny seeds of abandonment until they grew into a decision everyone pretended was rational, so they walked away. Not all at once, in slow, cowardly steps. But they left him. What none of them knew was this. Evan had protected Nixira years ago with a private legal trust in his name. It was a quiet move his old college mentor recommended. Just in case anything ever happened, the trust held controlling shares. The trust could revoke Mark's authority. The trust was triggered by medical incapacitation, and the lawyer who walked in too Room 6. He was there to activate it because Nexira was now worth $850 million. Because the real founder was still alive, and because the world was about to learn that truth. Evan woke up on a Tuesday. Not dramatically. No movie-style gasp. More like surfacing from deep water after forgetting you were underwater. His eyes fluttered open to harsh ceiling lights and the steady beep of machines he didn't recognize. A nurse screamed for the doctor. People rushed in. Words hit him like wind through a cracked window. He couldn't speak at first. His throat felt like sandpaper. His arms felt like they belonged to someone else. But his mind was there, and the first thing he understood, even before he knew the date, was that nobody familiar was in the room. No Claire. No Mark. No Mom. Just strangers in scrubs. And a man in a suit who looked relieved in a way that felt personal. The man introduced himself as Evan's attorney. He explained time as if it were a delicate object. 6 weeks. A crash. A coma. Family visits. Then none. Evan tried to process it all, but emotions in that moment weren't neat enough to name. It was a jumble of grief, confusion, and a sharp, quiet ache. The kind that says you were loved conditionally. And you just found out the limit. The attorney didn't sugarcoat the rest. Nexira had grown massively. Mark had been operating as CEO. Press, investors, contracts, all deferred to Mark's leadership. But the trust Evan created was still valid. And now that Evan was medically conscious, it could be activated fully. Evan listened, exhausted but focused. His body was weak. His instincts weren't. He asked for a phone. The attorney looked like he'd been waiting for that. He opened a folder. Inside were copies of filings and emails Mark had hidden. Evidence of misrepresentation. A timeline of deception. Evan couldn't shout. He couldn't even sit up without help. But humiliation doesn't require physical strength. It settles in your chest like a stone, still beneath the hurt. Something else rose. Clarity. He wasn't just fighting for money. He was fighting for his identity. Over the next 2 weeks, Evan worked with hospital lawyers and board contacts. He moved slowly but deliberately. The trust revoked Mark's authority as CEO. Emergency board meetings were called. Investors were stunned. The press got wind of it and started circling. Mark didn't take it quietly. He showed up at the hospital after hearing Evan was awake, 2 days too late and a whole conscience short. He tried to come in with the old brotherly smile. It's the one that used to make Evan want to believe. But Evan had already stopped believing. Mark said he'd been holding things together. Said he'd been there every step. Said the trust activation was overkill. Evan should think about the company's image, about stability. About family. Funny how people remember family when they're about to lose a throne. Evan didn't yell. He didn't have to. He just asked his attorney to stay in the room and let Mark talk, because Mark's words were the kind lawyers adore: contradictions, self-incrimination. Ego in a tailored suit. Mark left angry, claiming betrayal. The next showdown wasn't in a hospital room. It was in a boardroom 3 weeks later. Evan was still healing. He walked in with a cane, thinner than before, his face pale under the fluorescent lights. The table was huge. The windows overlooked a skyline he'd helped buy without ever seeing it. Mark sat at the head, or at least he had before Evan entered. The board members shifted like people who suddenly realized the story they'd been told was missing a main character. There were investors there, too, the kind who wear watches worth more than Evan's first car. Mark tried to take control of the narrative. Still, the attorney presented the trust documents, the original filings, and evidence that Evan was the actual founder and majority controller. There's a special silence that happens when influential. People realize they've been accidentally backing the wrong horse. Mark tried to argue. He tried to claim mutual consent, tried to reframe it as team effort. The evidence didn't care about his charisma. Neither did the board. They voted. Mark was removed. Evan was reinstated as founder, CEO, And the room, this room that once treated him like a background character, had to reintroduce itself to him. Here's the part that hit hardest, though. Claire was in the building waiting outside the boardroom. She'd come when the headlines started whispering that Evan was alive and Nixira wasn't. After all, she looked different, tired in a new way. Like someone who'd made a decision based on half the truth. She asked if she could talk. Evan didn't slam the door. He didn't gloat. He didn't beg. He just listened, as she said she'd been scared, overwhelmed, pushed by Mark, and convinced Evan would never be coming back. She apologized. An apology can be honest and still arrive too late. Evan didn't say he hated her. He didn't say he forgave her either. He just said he needed time to become someone who wasn't defined by what people took from him. And that was the actual breaking point. Not the crash, not the coma. The moment he finally chose himself over the people who only loved him when life was easy. Dear audience, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to give it a like. It really helps. Evan could have ruined Mark. Legally, he had every tool. Fraud, identity manipulation, investor deception. You don't play CEO. Dress up with an $850 million company and walk away clean. But revenge wasn't what kept Evan alive through years of sacrifice and 6 weeks in darkness. So he did something more innovative. He let justice do its job without letting bitterness drive the car. Mark faced consequences. Settlements, legal restrictions, and a public removal that made future investors back away like he was radioactive. The world doesn't always punish people the way you want, but sometimes it punishes them the way they deserve. Evan returned to Nixira quietly. He didn't throw a flashy comeback party. He didn't post a victory tour. He just started working again, this time as the man in front, not the ghost behind. The board offered him a rebranding moment. It's a chance to spin the story as a heroic resurrection. Evan declined because he wasn't a brand. It's a human being who'd been drained by years of carrying others. He hired a new coup, a woman who'd built companies from scratch and didn't need to borrow other people's ideas. He regrounded Nixira in what it had always wanted to be, a company that solved real problems without worshiping ego. Then he did something nobody expected. He set up a program inside Nixira for young developers. He overlooked talent from small towns, low-income backgrounds, and community colleges. People who reminded him of himself back when his laptop hinge was held together by hope. It wasn't a PR move. He didn't even announce it until the first class graduated. He just wanted to build ladders where he'd once found walls. As for Claire, life got complicated because healing doesn't follow a spreadsheet. They didn't jump back into a marriage as if nothing had happened. They co-parented, they talked about their son. They learned to coexist in a reality that had shifted. Claire found out the whole truth over time about Mark, about the trust, about how deep the betrayal went. The guilt hit her hard. Evan didn't weaponize it. He told her what he truly felt. Abandonment leaves a scar. But scars can teach you where you survived. Eventually, they found a rhythm. Not perfect, not fairy tale, real. They rebuilt something quieter. Not the marriage they had before. A better one. Because it was built on truth. Not stress-patched promises. Evan's mom came around too. She showed up with a casserole and trembling hands, apologizing in the clumsy way older generations often do. Half regret, half defense, all fear. Evan hugged her, but he also didn't pretend it hadn't hurt. He told her he loved her and that he'd learned that love doesn't mean access. That family can be forgiven without being allowed to drive your life again. That boundary changed everything. His health improved slowly. Physical therapy, long walks, sleeping like someone who no longer feared disaster around every corner. His son grew up watching his dad not just succeed, but recover. And something in that was more valuable than the money. He didn't grow up seeing a man who punished the world for pain. He grew up seeing a man who turned pain into purpose. Nixira kept soaring. It expanded globally. It acquired smaller firms. It became a quiet giant in the industry. The valuation climbed past $850 million and kept rising. But Evan stayed grounded. He moved back near his hometown, not into the same life, but close enough to remember where he came from. He funded a tech lab at his old high school. He paid off medical debts for families who couldn't breathe under the weight of bills. Not because he was trying to be a saint, because he knew what it felt like to be trapped. And freedom tastes best when shared. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories every week. Here's what Evan Carter's story really teaches. If you strip away the headlines and the commas in $850 million, people think betrayal is always loud. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes, betrayal is just a slow fading of visits. A silence after the phone rings. It's decision made without you in the room. Evan didn't wake up to applause. He woke up to emptiness, and that emptiness forced him to meet himself without the noise of other people's expectations. He learned what a lot of us know too late. If someone only loves you when you're helpful, they don't love you. They love the version of your life that benefits them. And the wild part, you can still forgive them and choose not to hand your future over to them again. That's not bitterness. That's growth. Because the goal isn't to win against the people who doubted you. The goal is to become someone who no longer needs their approval to breathe. Now for the twist. You didn't see coming. A year after everything had settled, Evan received a letter from the Chicago logistics firm. This deal had helped Nazora explode. Inside was a plaque and a scholarship announcement. They had created a national annual award for quiet innovators in supply chain technology. They named it the Evan Carter Fellowship, not because of the coma, not because of the scandal, but because after learning the truth, they went back through Nagara's code history. They saw who built the architecture, who solved the impossible problems, who never tried to take credit. They saw the invisible man who saved them millions. So now, every year, 5 overlooked engineers from tough backgrounds get full scholarships and mentorship through that fellowship. 5 people who might have stayed invisible without someone like Evan proving invisibility isn't destiny. So when you think about this story, don't just think about the family who walked away. Think about the man who woke up anyway. Think about the strength it takes to rebuild when nobody's clapping. Think about your own life for a second. How many times have you been underestimated, sidelined, treated like you were only worth something when you were producing? And what would happen if you decided today that your value isn't negotiable? Because sometimes the biggest comeback isn't returning to the room that rejected you. It's building a new room where people like you don't have to beg to be seen. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories and new videos.